The tarot is a set of 78 cards and can actually be used to play a trick-based game similar to bridge, although most of the time they are used for divination instead of gameplay. The tarot has a widespread influence on culture, perhaps most notably portrayed in JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, as the stands were named after the cards of the major arcana. But the less we talk about JoJo, the better. Instead, let's first look at the minor arcana. There are 56 cards in the minor arcana. Coming in 4 suits, there are pentacles, swords, wands, and cups, with 10 number cards as well as 4 face cards. The concept of 4 suits, as well as 13 of the cards, were translated pretty well into more modern decks, with the exception being the page or squire card being omitted. These 56 cards compose the minor arcana, which is not the subject of the video. Instead, I want to take a look at the major arcana, which is composed of the remaining 22 archetypal cards. Archetype in the Jungian sense, not the elemental hero sense. Each of the major arcana has a symbolism-laden illustration, and I will be showing off the traditional Rider-Waite-Smith deck from 1909, as well as a more contemporary deck. As far as interpretation, I will be quoting Arthur Edward Waite's The Pictorial Key to the Tarot, which was circulated with later editions of the Rider-Waite-Smith deck. Let's gloss over the happy squirrel, as it is a terrible omen, and start with 0, the Fool. The Fool represents the hero at the start of the journey, with the rest of the deck representing a story which unfolds. As the person who is receiving the fortune-telling, the Fool is the everyman stand-in, or the card most closely associated with the querent or seeker of the fortune. Other interpretations include folly, mania, extravagance, intoxication, and delirium. I will only be talking about the normal orientation for expediency's sake, but there's a completely different set of interpretations based on the reverse orientation. Next is the Magician, which represents skill, diplomacy, self-confidence, but also sickness, pain, loss, disaster, and falling into the snares of enemies. The Magician can also represent the querent when the querent is male. In contrast to the Magician, we have the High Priestess, which could represent the querent if the querent is female. If the querent is male, though, the Priestess may represent a romantic interest. Symbolically, though, it represents secrets, mystery, and the future as yet unrevealed. Like the Ask Again Later response from the Magic 8-Ball. The Empress then represents fruitfulness, initiative, length of days, but also difficulty, doubt, and ignorance. And again, there is a mention of the unknown, but more so in the sense of something being obscured, rather than something being unknowable. To mirror the Empress, we see the Emperor, who represents stability, power, protection, and perhaps a great person the querent will interact with, but more generally, authority and will. Sometimes titled the Pope, the Hierophant represents marriage or an alliance, captivity and servitude, but also mercy and goodness. As a figure, the Hierophant is the man to whom the querent has recourse. The Lovers has a very obvious interpretation of attraction, love, and beauty, but also trials overcome. This is in contrast to the Hierophant, which mentions marriage in the sense of unity over the romantic interpretation. As our first object in the tarot, we have the Chariot, which was an instrument of war outside of being transportation. As a result, it has quite the violent set of interpretations. Providence, also war, vengeance, and trouble, but also overcoming with succor and triumph. Next, we have the concept of Fortitude or strength, representing power, energy, action, courage, and magnanimity. This is the sign of complete success and honors. The Hermit is a portent of wariness, representing prudence and circumspection. It might be a warning against treason, dissimulation, roguery, and corruption. Approach with caution. Returning to objects, we have the Wheel of Fortune, an allusion to the Rota Fortuna spun by the goddess of fate. It represents destiny, fortune, success, luck, and felicity, which is much better than the Hermit. Justice is another card with fairly literal interpretation, as equity, rightness, probity, and, in the sense of justice being served, triumph of the deserving side of the law. The Hanged Man shares the circumspection interpretation with the Hermit, but also trials and sacrifice, which leads to wisdom, discernment, intuition, divination, and prophecy. The divination and prophecy aspects are quite funny to me, as that is what the Querent is there for. Death has a literal interpretation as mortality and destruction, as well as milder variants with things ending or the corruption of a man, but also 3 specific interpretations. For a man, the loss of a benefactor. For a woman, contrarieties. And for a maid, failure in marriage prospects. Not good. Next is the virtue of temperance, in the moderation sense, not the movement against alcohol consumption. The interpretation is obvious: economy, frugality, management, and accommodation. The devil is more threatening than death itself, as it is that which is predestined, but not for this reason evil. It represents ravage, violence, vehemence, extraordinary efforts, force, and ultimately fatality. The illustration of Bahamut also shows the occult concept of as above, so below. The Tower continues this negative trend, representing in particular an unseen catastrophe. More generally, it represents misery, distress, indignance, adversity, calamity, disgrace, deception, and ruin. This is likely inspired by the biblical Tower of Babel, which fell and plunged the world into discord. Then we see the Star, which represents loss, theft, privation, and abandonment. Fortunately, another reading says hope and bright prospects. Perhaps a star to wish upon. Back to Dower, we have the Moon, representing hidden enemies, danger, calumny, darkness, terror, deception, occult forces, and error. Finally, a good portent with the Sun, which represents material happiness, fortunate marriage, and contentment. The Last Judgment, or simply Judgment, has the most specific interpretation yet: total loss through lawsuit, which must mean that you are on the wrong side of justice. It also represents change of position, renewal, and outcome. The final card is the World, which in meaning is closest to traveling the world. It represents assured success, voyage, route, immigration, flight, change of place, and the odd one out, recompense. These are the 22 members of the major arcana, but decks may differ significantly in what they contain. For instance, the Wade Rider Smith set that I have here swaps the position of strength and justice in order to better conform with the astrology of the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, but that... I don't understand.